How's it going, everyone? This is Alec, and today we're going back to the classics. It's been a while since we had a proper Morrowind mystery solving adventure, and I believe that I might have prepared something really special for you today.
I suppose I could spare a moment or two.
It'll be sort of a journey centered around the enigmatic character known as Mordrin Hanin. You might have heard of him, but if not, it's not surprising, as this guy is referenced in-game only through a couple of random short notes, but in a typical Elder Scrolls fashion, even through a couple of sentences and some wonderfully crafted ambiental storytelling, we can actually piece together a rather interesting story.
Can we hurry this up?
So as usual, today's journey will contain a little bit of everything. Memorable side characters, remote locations, unique artifacts, obscure lore. But what makes the story of Mordrin Hanin truly special, in my opinion, is that it's not given as a single, cohesive or linear storyline. Instead, it's fragmented and dispersed throughout Wardenfell, so it's really left to players to step up and piece all the clues together. As a reward, besides some unique powerful items, we also get a small but invaluable insight into a little-known period of Morrowind's ancient history, the time of so-called Skyrim captivity.
Seen any elves?
Now, we will begin our journey by going to Palena, a cave in the West Gash region, not far south of Alt Velothi. It's kinda remote, and due to a rough terrain, it could be somewhat difficult to find. But once inside, we're gonna witness a rather bizarre scene, and easily one of the most memorable encounters in-game. There are a couple of dead smugglers on the ground, surrounded by rogue Daedra. In particular, a bunch of scamps and a single bouncing ogrim. Looks like another case of conjuration gone wrong. But there's more. Locked in a cage high above the ground is a guy responsible for this entire mess, a Breton sorcerer, Invold. Invold was hired by the smugglers to summon Daedra, and as for what purpose, my guess would be as a workforce, or perhaps even a source of alchemical ingredients. As we're gonna see later, summoning lesser Daedra for heavy lifting and digging isn't that uncommon. However, there's always the risk of Daedra turning against the summoner, especially a less experienced one. Well, it turns out Ogrim got hollow control, and the scamps slaughtered the smugglers and served them to Invold in a broth. In case you didn't hear that right, yes, they literally cooked some of the smugglers and forced poor Invold to eat them.
Please have mercy. I was the sorcerer on this job, but the Ogrim got out of control and the scamps slaughtered my companions and served them to me in a broth and stripped me and made me wear this outfit. Help me out of here, please.
While having to wear women's clothes and a Colovian helm. By the way, I love how game tells us that Colovian helm came with the Daedra, meaning that one of the scamps wore the hat at the moment of summoning, somewhere in the hellish depths of oblivion, only to then give it to Invold, in some sort of a humiliation ritual. But it also tells us a little bit about the Daedra. They apparently have a fashion taste, they can perform basic tasks like cooking, and, not surprisingly, have a rather sadistic and cruel side. But enough about that. The real reason for coming here is on this table. Besides all the alchemical ingredients, including a very rare, if not unique sample of genuine human flesh, there's a book, Hanin's Wake, and it's our first piece of info about the character of Mordrin Hanin. I wouldn't even call it a book, more of an excerpt from some ancient Nord chronicle. And this particular fragment describes the process of brewing a lethal drink, used in a ritual of mass sacrifice following Hanin's death. And upon that year of the reign of Wulfhard and his sons, the magnificence that was Mordrin Hanin ended in this world. Representatives of Ashalmavia, Mal Kashishi, and Al Sota gathered in a great host at the vastness of Assur-Nabitashbi. Even Hilbongard and Dorak Gusal were lured from their forge, and for a time the fires of Anudnabia were silent. And thus, on the 9th day of mourning, many slaves and enemies were sacrificed, and the cup of passage was mixed according to the direction of Hanin's formulae. So what follows is a strange and morbid procedure of mixing various ingredients, including among other, blood of traitors, Daedra hearts, and of course, moon sugar. The wake was considered a great success, as the beverage killed a great many guests, and thus Mordrin Hanin was supplied with companions in the next world. So it looks like that these unfortunate smugglers attempted to craft the legendary poison, but again, it's not really clear for what exact purpose. But something tells me that they weren't regular smugglers. In fact, just north of the cave is the Daedric ruin of Ashalmavia, which was mentioned in the text. It has a shrine to Moloch Baal, and what's interesting is that local cultists kidnapped a woman, and I'm pretty sure she was meant to be sacrificed. So could it be that someone is trying to emulate the ceremony described in Hanin's Wake? Were these smugglers and Involt then members of the same Daedric cult based in Ashalmavia? Well, that's a question for some other time. We are here to learn about Hannon, and let's see what can we extract from these few sentences in the book. Well, my impression is that he was almost certainly a Nord, and this may come as a big surprise to some. An important Nord Daedra cultist in the middle of Morrowind. His name sounds, well, Nordic, and his events are dated by the rule of Wulfheart. And yes, that Wulfheart, Ysmir, Dragon of the North, thus placing him somewhere in the late 5th or early 6th century of the First Era. We know that Wulfheart reigned between the years 480 and 533. However, this is already the time after the so-called Skyrim captivity, as Nords were driven out of Morrowind in either year 412 or 416. So Mordrin Hanin was a Nord living in Morrowind in a period after the Skyrim captivity. He was, by all account, a significant individual, referred to as magnificent. He also owned a number of slaves and captives. And representatives of other major Daedric temples gathered to mourn his death in Assur-Nabitashpi, most likely a place of his residence. Hanin's Wake also mentions Hilbungard and the Dork Gusal as a couple of another important characters. They were lured from their forge, and this is quite interesting as these two individuals also come with their own obscure lore. You see, Hilbungard and Dorak are mentioned separately during the Imperial Cult questline as the makers of legendary Skull Crusher.
I am an oracle of the Imperial Cult. Sometimes I am even blessed to be granted visions.
Lalatia Varian, priestess of the divines, serving also as an oracle, will say that during the Skyrim captivity, the master weaponsmith Hilbungard of Skyrim and the enchanter Dorak Gusal created an enchanted warhammer, featherlight yet brutal as an Atronach's fist. Lalatia will then send us on a quest of finding the enchanted hammer. However, its location is unknown and requires a bit of detective work. Unless we read the Hanin's Wake, which states that Hilbungard and Dorak operated in the temple forge of Anutnabia. I'm not going to delve deeper into these two characters and their quest right now, but let's just say that they were by all means above your average enchanter or weaponsmith. Now, Lalatia specifically states that the forging of Skull Crusher occurred during the Skyrim captivity, and not after. And we already concluded that Hannon lived after that period, during the reign of Wulfheart. So let's say that all given dates are true. This would make Hilbungard and Dorak extremely old during the events of Hanin's Wake, quite possibly even unnaturally long-lived, which is not that impossible considering their advanced knowledge of all things Daedra and magic. So, going back to the text of Hanin's Wake, it gives us a list of these Daedric temples that are still found on Wardenfell, and names some of the people who apparently lived and ruled over them, including at least a couple of Nords and Dorak Gusal, who might be a Breton, but that's just my guess. My point is, they were all foreigners, Outlanders of high status and power in a highly hostile land, especially if it's set after the Skyrim's captivity. And it seems like at one point there was a vast, powerful network of Daedra worshipping cults based in their temples and citadels, even after the united forces of Chimera and Dwemer succeeded in driving out the Nords. And speaking of the First Era, in general, this was such a turbulent and, if I may say, interesting time, ever since I I started playing Morrowind, I always wondered about the origin and the purpose of Daedric ruins. In the present day, they are kinda reduced to being remnants of some distant, dark past, taken over by isolated cults and outlaws, but there was a time when they were thriving centers, inhabited by well-organized factions, and sort of incorporated into a Dunmer society. You see, for the Dunmer, they were temples dedicated to the so-called Bad Daedra, collectively known as the House of Troubles. Mehrunes Dagon, Molag Bal, Sheogorath, and Malakot are seen as adversaries, tricksters, whose sole purpose is to test the people in various ways. They were seen as essential as the good Daedra, and although not directly worshipped within Velothi temples, they were still acknowledged and present in the daily life within their strange alien temples, dotting Morrowind's hostile terrain. This principle of assimilating and overcoming evil through a constant challenge in order to spiritually grow is at the core of a Dunmer faith ever since the early days. Thus, the existence of these menacing-looking temples. They are literal fragments of oblivion, set in the mortal world, in order to constantly challenge people and their fate. So, could it be that during Skyrim's conquest, Nordic Daedra worshippers of certain power, like minor nobles, wizards, or chieftains, encountered these temples during raids and took residence within them, remaining there even after the Nords' defeat, and continuing to rule over small territories as warlords? It's a very interesting and unexplored subject. The game, in fact, has another very similar callback to that era. There's a quest which I covered in detail in my video on 5 Morrowind's epic quests, in which we are sent to uncover a tomb of Olmgerd the Outlaw, son of Harald Handfree, a first-age king of Skyrim. Olmgerd the Outlaw fits the image of a Nord invader almost perfectly. He was King's illegitimate son, set on his own adventure and conquest, eventually dying somewhere on Wardenfell and getting buried deep underground on a longship filled with treasure. Olmgerd's burial is quite a unique location in-game, and evidence of Morrowind's ancient conflict with Nord invaders. Yet not the only one, as Mordrin Hanin's story and his own burial chamber portray an even deeper connection. And yes, going back to our topic, Mordrin Hanin can be found in-game, or what's left of him. His burial is found in a cave of Ibar Dad, in a close proximity to Asurnabitashpi, Daedric ruin that, as we already said, served as his residence. Cave of Ibar Dad is inhabited by a couple of sorcerers looking for Mordrin Hanin's treasure, Badama Anderis and Elante. Elante is a peculiar character in that she canonically survives the events of Morrowind, due to the fact that she reappears in Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, again on a scholarly mission of finding a lost Daedric shrine. In her own words, Elante spent years searching for the location of Hanin's burial, and she is apparently associated with the Mages Guild, and in her room we can find this note. At last, after these many years of searching, I'm sure I've located the proper caverns. The crystals are just as the stories describe. Wrapped in crystalline embrace, the silver-pursed brow of the traitors shall ward his sleep. This must be the place. This must be Mordrin Hanin's tomb. Badama and I have established quarters here. No one shall steal my discovery. To imagine what treasures are hidden within the stone. Those guild fools mocking my studies. The powers I shall unleash upon their miserable skins. Tomorrow we will summon workers to begin excavation. Now, rest of the note mostly deals in a rather funny way with her problems with scamps, unwilling to obey instructions. We even discover that some of the scamps tried stealing potions and running away, and there are even hints of a cave being filled with strange, unnatural force. The summoning was successful, although Badama lacks concentration. We nearly had a storm Atronach, but her poor skills allowed it to escape. We shall make do with the vermin. To think of the earth we could have riven with the Atronach. Now we are forced to watch the scamps scrape the surface with picks and shovels. Hideous, miserable creatures. Otherworldly, vermin, bastards. Scamps are the most untrue of servants. Whining, thieving, lazy, and treacherous. one attempted to flee, stealing a number of potions in his flight. I made short work of him. Perhaps the other will think deeply before following his path. Success! I discovered the traces of worked stone, which, when inspected closely, were obviously of Daedric workmanship. After great effort and much moving of earth and stone, the remaining blockage fell away with a great splash into a pool of loathsome water. The foul and noisome air which escaped nearly choked me. The scamps broke into a great frenzy, trying to hurl themselves through the opening, shrieking with either terror or joy. The creatures are clearly insane. I've been forced to erect a gate at the opening. The scamps still attempt to escape into its maw. I've placed Bethesda as sentry to monitor the worthless creatures. Perhaps they'll tear her to pieces in her sleep. No, I still require her talents in the upcoming search. The baleful effects of this place are telling on me. I've only just managed to distill some potions to aid us in our endeavor. Soon, though, we will enter the chambers and finally realize a life's ambition. Sometimes I hear voices in my dreams calling on Mordrin's name. Is it terror or adulation? Alright, so deeper into the cave, we will soon find a large Daedric door, guarded by a couple of Germora lords and a runaway scamp, and within, a vault and a tomb of Mordrin Hanin, closely guarded by a golden saint. And finally, the mysterious Mordrin Hanin. His remains are also guarded, so to speak, by a number of skulls pierced with cursed silver daggers. Each one will summon a ghost upon removal. And these skulls, according to Elante's notes, belong to Hanin's traitors. So we can only assume that Hanin died violently by the hands of someone within his own circle. Next to his remains are extremely powerful and rare Daedric items. A battle axe, shield, staff, and a unique Daedric face of inspiration. These items most likely belonged to Hannon and were placed in his tomb ritualistically for the afterlife. And then there's another unique item placed above Hannon, Eladon's Ward, a powerful enchanted shield that belonged to a legendary Breton knight, Eladon. We don't know how it ended up in Hannon's tomb, especially since it's a holy item and not a Daedric. Perhaps it's placed as a trophy of some kind. But regardless, everything about Hannon's tomb tells us that he was a remarkable individual of power and status. There's even a strange, menacing aura within the cave itself. Elante's notes give us a hint at this, when she writes about baleful effects of this place, hearing voices in her dreams, calling out Mordrin's name, and scamps going insane and running away towards the tomb, as if they were summoned by Hannon from beyond the grave. There's no doubt that Hannon was deeply involved with Daedra and the mystical arcane arts, perhaps even serving as a high priest of Mehun's Dagon within the shrine of Assur-Nabitashpi. But now, I'd like to mention an interesting detail regarding these creepy Daedric helmets. Tomb of Olmger the Outlaw also has a number of rare Daedric artifacts, although in his case they were carefully hidden away and accessible only through levitation. In fact, his tomb contains another unique Daedric helmet called Face of God. And in order to complete our little Daedric helmet mystery tour, remember the temple forge of Anutnabia, the location of Skullcrusher? Well, it just so happens that this place also hides another Daedric helmet called Face of Terror. So now we have three, I believe, unique Daedric faces found in 3 locations, all related to First Era Nords. Which makes me wonder, was Olmgerd too a Daedra worshipper, although not quite as open as Hannon? I mean, he was called an outlaw, after all, and his official Nord-style burial could only serve for the public. And next to him is another enchanted weapon, Stormkiss, not as legendary as Skullcrusher, but still a worthy weapon in its own right. So it makes me wonder if Olmgerd's weapon was also crafted by Hilbengard and Dorak, although that would make our entire story even more mysterious, as Olmgerd lived more than a couple of hundred years before the events of Hannon's wake. And we already spoke about the potential unnatural lifespan of these 2 characters. But if they were present during the life of Olmgerd the Outlaw, it would make them basically as long-lived as the elves. In that regard, I just want to say that one of the reasons why I always liked Nords is because I always felt something quite esoteric and otherworldly about them. there's a certain depth behind that stereotypical image of an ignorant, loud, mead-drinking barbarian. The fact is, in the past, Nords were much more in tune with their mystical aspect. For example, wielding a voice was much more common. In fact, both Hannon and Hilbungard could easily be tomb users. And in Hannon's case, him having a power of the voice could secure him a position of power in Morrowind. And we should also remember that up until Jurgen Windcaller's reformation, voice users were anything but pacifist. Nords frequently used voice to their advantage, including tearing down walls and leveling entire villages to the ground. And after all, even though Nord culture isn't as open towards Daedra worship, Skyrim itself is home to a number of large Daedric shrines. Mehrunes Dagon has a giant statue, Meridia has a large temple complex just off the road to the capital of Solitude, and so on. Even Jurgen Windcaller's tomb has his name famously written in a Daedric script, prompting some controversial fan theories about his secret Daedric connections. And Morrowind the game has a number of prominent Daedra worshipping Nords, including a notorious necromancer, Sorquil the Raven, and a couple of other hidden ones. To conclude, Nords definitely have a hidden darkness within, and a potential for much more than wielding an axe. Unfortunately, later games, and especially Skyrim, significantly tone down these elements of Nord culture. Voice wielding is almost an entirely lost tradition, and magic in general viewed as something generally harmful and evil, which is why I often look back to the distant past and times when Tamriel itself seemed much more mystical and intriguing. And as for Morrowind, strange case of Mordrin Hanin only proves, once again, game's masterful ambiental storytelling. With that said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.
And thanks for leaving me the skirt. It's not really my color, but better than nothing.